My name's Adam Cox. I'm the founder and managing director of the Relations Group and also Radio Relations, the UK's radio PR specialists. And today we're going to be talking about the top 5 reasons for having an ISDN unit actually in your head office. First question naturally to ask is, what is an ISDN unit? An ISDN unit is a small device that can enable you to communicate directly with radio stations in the format that they need for you to come across on air as if you're in studio quality. To the listener listening to the radio station, it will sound like you're actually in the studio. The audience won't know that you're in your head office. They will think that you're actually in the studio doing the interview live on air. So it has the advantage mainly of having better sound quality. So when you do the interview, you come across much crisper and cleaner. And for those larger radio stations, having the right quality is going to make you sound much more professional. So generally radio stations, particularly radio stations like the BBC radio stations like Radio 4 or Radio 5 or some of the larger commercial groups that are Bauer owned or global owned, normally seek out spokespeople that can actually do an interview in what they call ISDN quality. ISDN simply is a format, it's a digital format of transferring data. But what it really means in terms of sound quality is that it's twice as good as a normal phone line. Now what the ISDN unit itself is a small box that means that you can plug in a microphone and headphones and link up to a radio station in the same format. And the way that that happens is that on a standard phone line, you communicate through a codec called G711. That's actually what the codec is. Most people don't know that. But ISDN link-ups to radio stations typically use different codecs. Now there's several codecs that are used by radio stations to do outside broadcasts. A popular one that's used by commercial radio stations in the newsrooms is a codec called aptX. The BBCs typically will use a codec called G722, and occasionally there's other codecs like CDQ Prima or MPEG-2. But the two main ones to be able to link up to do interviews on radio are G722 and aptX. So the box itself, typically when we work with head offices and clients all across the UK, typically for most of them that do already have an ISDN unit, typically they will have a Glensound unit. Now feel free to Google Glensound, but Glensound manufactures lots of studio equipment. And one of the studio equipment that they produce is this ISDN unit. The two most popular models that head offices use tend to be the GSGC4 and the GSGC5. Now these two models are virtually identical. The only difference is that the GSGC4 is suitable for one spokesperson, whereas the 5 can have 2 spokespeople plugged in at the same time and still both connect to the radio station at that particular point. So having one of these units, the main thing that you want to be looking out for is the codec. Now if you were choosing one straight from Glensound, I would recommend that you choose the dual codec, which means it covers both the aptX and the G722 codec. So whichever radio station codec that they prefer you to communicate, it will automatically detect that codec and then communicate in that particular way. Whereas if you have a single unit, single codec, then you would have to specify that codec to the radio station, and if they are not compatible with that, then that could cost you the actual interview. So the key thing is an ISDN unit is a unit that enables you to link up to radio stations in studio quality. The most popular unit is the Glensound. For 2 spokespeople, that would be the GSGC5, and you're communicating in studio quality, and it folds up in a small case, which means you just bring it out when you need to do an interview. So it's very compact. You don't need an actual studio built in your head office, and that will enable you to link up to radio stations. Now the typical cost for a Glensound GSGC5, which is the one I'd recommend that you have, because you never know if you would have two spokespeople doing an interview at the same time. That's always a possibility. Is it ranges between £2,000 and £4,000. Now the key difference in that cost is the codec. If you get a single codec, it's going to be nearer the £2,000 end, and if it's a dual codec, which is the one that I'd recommend, that's going to be a £4,000 approximate cost. Now we as Radio Relations have a number of these. We've got almost 10 of these outside broadcast units. For the clients that we work with, we actually set them up, we do the training so they can actually know how to install them, use them, and link up to radio stations, whether receiving an inbound call or actually dialing out from the unit itself. It has a keypad, so you can actually dial out to the radio stations. So the top 5 benefits of having an ISDN unit actually in your head office. Well, number 1, it gives you the ability to take advantage of ad hoc media requests. So if your PR team or your marketing team receive a call from Sky News Radio or Radio 5, Radio 4, or a radio station, could be globally, and they request an interview in studio quality, then rather than having to do something on Skype or on an audio app, you can actually do it live using the ISDN unit. So quite often in many industries, there's opportunities where the media will seek out a particular company or a brand to comment on a particular story. And if that's the case, then suddenly you become eligible in a technical way to be able to do that interview. Number 2 is reacting to the news agenda. Every day, stories break, and when they break, quite often the media, the broadcast media, are looking to either find comment for that story or to evolve the story and take it in a different direction. Now, having an ISDN unit actually in your head office gives you the ability to actually react to the news agenda. And you don't have to sit around waiting for those ad hoc requests. You could do a broadcast release saying that as a result of this story, your spokespeople are available for comment. And if you say that you have the ability to do interviews in ISDN quality with the codecs that you can do that on, any journalist working in the broadcast news arena will see that what differentiates you from anyone else is that you're able to do studio quality interviews from your own head office on whatever that reactive story is. So in addition to be able to do ad hoc interviews, you could actually also react to the news agenda, and that could give you an edge over anyone else in your industry that has the ability, but they're not the technology to do the same thing, which is to react to that news story. Number 3 would be to save time. Many of our clients can be quite close to central London, where we have our studios. Quite often we'll source studios in major cities across the UK. We have studios that we use in Manchester, in Media City, in Edinburgh, Glasgow, Leeds, Bristol, Cardiff. But sometimes the spokespeople quite often are chief executives or highly knowledgeable technical people in particular areas. Quite often we'll work with doctors or research and development teams or just experts within an organisation. Quite often time is their scarce resource. And if they have to spend 2 or 3 hours travelling to one of our studios to prepare, then sometimes that can make it prohibitive, not from a cost perspective, but from a time perspective. Having an ISDN unit actually in your head office with the relevant people trained on how to use it means that some of our clients don't even need to come to our central London studio to do interviews. They can actually do it from their own head office. Our team will actually contact these broadcast journalists, these producers, these presenters in advance to schedule the interviews, but it does mean that they save the travelling time to the studios, any kind of prep time, and the travelling time back to the studios. So having an ISDN unit in your office can save massive amounts of time over the period of a year. Number 4 is preeminence. So quite often the media will want to go to a particular expert in an industry. If a story breaks or if they're looking to do a story, they want to go to a go-to expert. And having the ISDN unit in your office enables a consistent person to be that voice of your industry on a regular basis. And for example, the AA is a good example of an organization that have multiple spokespeople that have ISDN facilities in their office, but also in the homes of their key spokespeople. So the moment a story breaks, they're able to comment on that story before any other breakdown recovery company can comment on it. And that gives them the perception from an audience perspective of preeminence, of being a voice of their industry, of being an expert, which takes me on to the final benefit number 5, which is multiple spokespeople. Any company needs to be able to have a backup spokesperson if their primary spokesperson isn't available. Maybe they're on holiday. Maybe they're at a conference or a meeting, so they're not available at that particular time. So what the GSGC 5 does is enable you to have a primary and secondary spokesperson. And this is a great way of training secondary spokespeople, because your primary spokesperson can lead an interview, but by notifying the media that you have a second spokesperson gives them valuable experience of actually doing live and pre-recorded interviews without them feeling like they've got all the responsibility of that particular message or campaign on their shoulders. It's kind of like them riding a bike on stabilizers. It gives them that support and kind of reassurance while they're learning to actually get comfortable on radio, answering questions and delivering sound bites and key messages. So that can be an excellent way. Many companies as well have different experts that have different roles to play. So by having multiple spokespeople available, you may have a lead spokesperson that can maybe talk about research or surveys or statistics, and then a different spokesperson that can have a different take on the same story, which tends to lead to extended studio time and audience time, gives you a bigger reach, but it also means that you can get more complementary messages across. And so long as those spokespeople aren't saying the same thing, but they've got genuinely different takes on the same story, then it can lead to a very interesting interview. And both of these spokespeople wouldn't need to go to a central studio. You could use that ISDN unit inside your own office to be able to do those interviews. So those are the top 5 benefits of having an ISDN unit actually in your head office. So then there's 2 final questions that we need to answer. And the first question is, if you already have an ISDN unit, what's the best way to maximize it? And quite often I'll meet clients, sometimes marketing directors or PR managers in their head office, and I talk about ISDN interviews, and they'll tell me that they actually have an ISDN unit. And I'll ask them, when was the last time you've used it? And quite often the response will be, I can't remember, or we used to use it a lot, or the people that would need to use it either don't feel confident or they don't know how to actually set it up. So if you have an ISDN unit already, then what I would say is get in contact with us at the radio relations team, and it will either be myself or another member of the team, and we'll come out and we'll just do a refresher on how you can actually use your ISDN unit. We can patch in from our studio to you and do some mock interviews so that you can actually feel confident dialing out, receiving an inbound call, setting up, even doing a test link up on the BT ISDN loop to actually make sure that it's framing and connecting right. Now these things sound very technical, but once you know how to do it, they're very, very simple to do. And sometimes just having that refresher on how to use it can be very useful. The second thing is that if you have the technology, but you're not getting many interviews, sometimes it's because that there's a lack of either relationships or know-how as to how to communicate with the broadcast media to maximize the fact that you have spokespeople and the technology to do these radio interviews. Again, in which case, contact us at the radio relations team, and then what we can do is we can explain how we can develop a longer-term strategy so that we can position your spokespeople as preeminent in their industry so that they become not only the go-to requested spokesperson from your industry, but that we can actually start scheduling proactively forward-planned campaigns at specific events to complement your marketing and PR strategy. So they're the tips if you have already an ISDN unit. The next question is, well, if I don't have an ISDN unit, what should I do? And there's two answers to this. One is that you could simply go out and buy an ISDN unit. And if that's the case, I'd recommend going to Glen Sound and selecting a GC5 dual codec unit. And make sure you get that one, because that gives you the ability to do BBC and commercial interviews at the vast majority. And even those radio stations that prefer to record interviews in MPEG-2 or CDQ Prima, they will also have the capacity to do it on aptX or G722. So that would be my advice if you're going to buy one, but there is an alternative. As I said, we at Radio Relations have 10 of these outside broadcast units, and what quite often we'll do is we'll actually install them and lease them free of charge to head offices that we're working with on a regular basis. So the upfront cost of actually having one of these ISDN units is zero. And then it can be a case of, if it becomes useful and you're actually doing lots of interviews, then it makes sense to keep it. And if it isn't, you would just return it to us. So if you're interested in having an ISDN unit in your head office, then give us a call on Radio Relations. The number is 0207 158 0000. Drop us an email, go onto our website, which is radiorelations.co.uk. And if you're not sure yet, then the other thing that you can do is get in contact with us, because quite often I will speak within PR agencies or within larger press offices and just explain not just about how ISDN units work and how you can react or be proactive with radio stations, but other strategies about how you can tap into the broadcast needs of the BBC and the commercial radio industry to give them content that is valuable for them, that also complies with the Ofcom regulations on commerciality and rules on editorial justification. So I'm quite happy to come out and do one of those workshops completely without charge. But like I say, the key thing really is it's worth having one of these ISDN units inside your head office, even if you still prefer to do campaigns and interviews in a professional studio with an actual engineer. It's well worth having one of these ISDN units as a backup. And as Radio Relations are the UK's radio PR experts, it's well worth contacting us completely without obligation and without charge first, before you actually incur any costs. I've been Adam Cox, Managing Director of Radio Relations, and if you need any more information, just get in contact.